欢迎您收听爱家网教育生活节目。爱家网是一个服务华人家庭的新媒体，我们不定期地邀请各个领域的生活达人，分享他们的专业知识和生活经验，帮助华人家庭更好地融入美国社会。我们也十分欢迎在自己的领域中有所建树的朋友们自荐，成为爱家网下期节目的嘉宾。欢迎大家关注爱家网公众号北美爱家，获得下期节目信息。下面请您收听今天的主题节目。
大家好，欢迎大家收听爱家网教育生活节目第55期。今天我们请来了两位弦乐老师，为大家介绍学习弦乐的科普知识。弦乐的英文名称是 String Instruments， 指的是西洋管弦乐队中常见的小提琴、中提琴、大提琴和低音提琴。首先介绍一下今天的两位嘉宾老师。第一位是 Julian Langford， 茱莉亚音乐学院硕士，纽约石溪大学音乐博士近期毕业，专业是大提琴演奏。第二位是陈雨旋，中央音乐学院附中毕业之后进入纽约的 Eastman School of Music， 专业是小提琴演奏。学习弦乐和学习其他乐器有什么不同之处？是不是适合您的孩子呢？我们就来听听这两位弦乐演奏的专业人士，他们的成长道路以及他们在教学上的体验。First, we have Julian to introduce himself and say hello to everybody.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Julian, and I play the cello. And I have 2 degrees from the Juilliard School, and I am currently getting my doctorate in cello performance at Stony Brook University. I'm actually going to be graduating in, I think, maybe 2 weeks. So.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yuxuan, and I've been studying violin for like 20 years, and I got my bachelor degree in Eastman School of Music.
So all your life are dedicated to music?
Yes.
So far. And you all start from a very young age, right?
Yes.
Cool. And so same for Julian?
Yeah, I actually studied the same amount, 20 years.
Yeah.
Exactly 20 years.
Exactly 20 years, all right?
Yeah, it works out.
Me too.
Let's talk about a little bit about music and what music means to you. Let's start with Julian.
Sure. Well, music has always been a part of my life because both of my parents are in the music business. My mom is a concert pianist and also a piano teacher.
Wow.
And then my dad is a musicologist, so he's an academic musician where he does lectures at the Metropolitan Opera and he teaches music history at Manhattan School of Music.
Wow.
So, yeah, so music's always been a part of my life and it's always kind of surrounded me growing up. So it's really, it felt right to go into music when I was younger. My mom inspired me to play an instrument because I would hear her practicing every day, and I thought, I want to do that too. So that's kind of how it got started. But it's really, it's really such a huge part of who I consider to be is a musician.
Cool, thank you. And Yuxuan?
Well, mine's a little different because my parents has no music background at all. Mm-hmm. And it's just my dad likes to listen all kinds of classic music.
Your dad?
Yeah, my dad, yeah. When I was a kid, my mom signed up all kinds of different
after school activities.
Art school, yeah, like violin, drawing, or anything.
All right.
But violin is the one that accepts even younger, like 4 years old kids to start. I just jump in. Learning violin is actually hard as a kids because we always wanted to play to have something fun with friends.
Right.
When you have to practice, you got to do it alone. Mm-hmm. The thing about how to hold on and finish it by yourself is much important than just learning violin itself. So I guess that's what I learned from music. I love all kinds of music, mm-hmm. and music makes me pretty satisfying while play, while listen, and when you kind of have hard time during the life and such things.
So basically you find your peace through playing music. Cool.
You could say that, yeah.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. So why would you play string instruments?
As I mentioned before, when I was younger, I knew I wanted to play an instrument, but I didn't quite know which one at first. So my parents were nice enough to go to Sam Ash, which is like a general music store, and they let me try pretty much any instrument I wanted for like, I think it was a 6-month period where, you know, I played everything from, you can name it, it's just drums and trumpet and violin and saxophone and all these different instruments, and just trying to see what clicked.
How old were you?
I was 5.
5.
Yeah.
And you went to Sam Ash for 6 months?
Yeah.
On every weekend?
Yeah, basically.
And
yeah.
How much time did you spend there?
I'd say probably around 3 to 4 hours, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just such a fun experience because
Absolutely.
I was surrounded by all these new instruments and I didn't know what they were and I wanted to find out, and I was only 5, right? So I was so curious and trying to figure everything out. By the end of that journey after 6 months, I narrowed it down to the cello and the trumpet, which are to date my 2 favorite instruments. And then a few days later, I went to a New York Philharmonic concert at Carnegie Hall, and they played the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, which has a beautiful cello section solo in the slow movement.
I see.
And right after that concert, I went to my parents and I said, I want to play the cello.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and then they rented a cello for me just to play around with for, I think, about 2 weeks, and then they came back to me and they said, okay, are you completely sure you want to do the cello? And I said, absolutely. And then by the time I turned 6, we got private lessons.
That's a great story. So there are a couple of details I want to dig further.
Yeah.
So when you were 5 years old, you spent 6 months in Sam Ash, you play all the instruments. After that, you listened to the concert. That's when the cello struck you.
Yep.
Your parents rent a cello for you, and you spent about 2 weeks to play with it.
Right.
So during that time, are you just trying to figure out things on your own, or is somebody teaching you how to play cello during that 2 weeks?
No, it was more like I knew the cello, and then I was just experimenting and trying things around for myself.
I see.
And then when I got to a point where I wanted to learn even more than I could figure out, that's when my parents got lessons for me with a private teacher.
Thank you for sharing. What about Aixue?
My mom got me signed up for violin because
you can start at a young age, right?
Started young age, and also drawing or all kinds of stuff. I grew up in a small city. We don't have like concert or something about Western music.
No Carnegie Hall to go to.
But like I said, my dad loves those buying all kinds of CDs about about the classical music, and I found the violin one is particularly beautiful when it comes to all kinds of different music.
So out of the whole stack of CDs, the violin CD that stood out for you.
Yeah.
Do you remember any particular piece of music?
Yes, Carmen.
When
I was a kid, I was like dreaming of playing on the stage, like playing the perfect specific one as Carmen.
Thank you for sharing that experience. That means a lot for some of the parents and students, because that's how you guys start falling in love with music and fall in love with your instrument. And that could be something that they can learn and they can reference to when they try to introduce the music to their kids. So any prerequisite to learn either cello or violin or the string instrument, is there anything about you have to have long fingers, anything like that?
I would say that there aren't too many prerequisites, because there's always an exception to the rule. You might think that because the cello is a big instrument that you have to be, a tall person with large hands.
Right.
But there have been plenty of people over the years who haven't been large people with large hands who get around the cello really well. There's a very famous cellist named Natalia Gutmann, who's famous for being quite small. I think that she's on the shorter side and she has small hands, but she gets around very well.
Cool.
Of course, things would be slightly easier to have large hands because the instrument is large, but I wouldn't discourage anybody from trying the cello just because of their height or the size of their hands, for sure. It's how they feel they connect with the instrument if they want to learn it themselves.
Yaxue?
I agree with him. A lot of famous violin player with short hands, also longer hands, or even chubby a little bit, but as long as you practice, you could be very good.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Let's talk about different types of string instruments.
There are different sizes of cellos depending on proportionally how small or large someone is, usually by age. Same with violin and viola, which you'll hear in a second. There are eighth size cellos and quarter size, half size, and full size. Sometimes they even have 16th sizes, which are very tiny.
Wow.
Proportionally, it's a 16th of the size of the full size. So proportionally, it's cut down basically. It looks like a small viola with an end pin at the end of it. It's actually really cute with the little kids playing those tiny cellos.
There's violin, there's viola.
There's a double bass, which is
Double
even
bass.
bigger than the cello.
Okay. Basically, there are four different types. Viola and violin looks very similar. What's the difference between them?
Viola got a little bit heavier and a little bit compared to violin full size. The viola full size is a bit larger, longer. The way you play is exactly the same.
Okay.
Is exactly the same. Viola got 5 notes lower than violin. That's it.
Okay. So the range is different.
The range is a little bit different.
The major difference is really the range. If you know how to play one of them, will you be able to figure out how to play the rest easily?
It's definitely going to help you to get into some other instruments pretty quickly. For example, violin player could also play viola compared to, but I think cello is a little bit different because
Because the position differently.
Yeah,
right?
position differently, and posture and something. But for viola and violin, that's definitely yes.
Would it be more close to each other between the cello and double bass?
Yeah, I would say so because the cello and the double bass are more vertical, and the violin and viola is held behind the chin. So the entire angle and the setup of the instrument are different from the cello. But the cello and double bass, they're definitely similar. And I have some friends who play double bass who also teach cello, and then the opposite as well. Cellists who teach double bass.
Okay.
They're not exactly the same, but as was mentioned, it can quickly be figured out over time if you wanted to learn either the cello or the double bass.
So what is the appropriate age for a kid to start learning cello or violin? I know Yuxuan mentioned her experience that she started 4 years old. Julian, what's your experience?
There are always exceptions to the rule. For example, Carter Bray, the principal cellist in the New York Philharmonic, didn't pick up a cello until he was 11 years old, and he's now the principal cellist in the New York Philharmonic. So clearly, he was an exception. I mean, that's considered on the late side. But usually, I started at the age of 6. Usually, I would say 6 to 8 years old is the common one. But again, it all...
For cello or for any string instrument?
I would say for cello. I'm not completely sure about violin and viola.
For violin as well.
Yeah, same idea.
Yeah,
6 to 8.
6 to 8, or even
But you start much
younger,
earlier.
Even younger.
Right. I think for you guys it can be younger.
Because violin has even smaller sizes.
How much does the instrument cost? Let's start with cello.
Well, there's a very large range. It can cost anything from a few $100s to a few $1,000s, and then when you get into the very fancy ones, it can be up to millions of dollars. It's a very wide range. Same with violin and viola. The price is usually made depending on who made the instruments. There are very famous makers and things like that.
Sure. Handmade on the
handmade
factors,
and where it was made, like in Italy or in France and stuff like that, and when it was made. So basically, the older the instrument, the higher the price it could be. So if it was made in 1800 or 1900, because instruments get better with age, because the wood kind of develops over time, then the price goes up as the instrument gets older over time.
So for beginners, what are the typical price range?
Yeah, I would say a few $100s to maybe 1,000 or something like that. It's very, very manageable.
Okay.
And you can even rent them too.
I see.
Yeah.
So do most people rent, or do most people buy?
They usually, to start with, they rent,
I see.
and then if they really like an instrument, or they realize that they're going to continue seriously and are very committed, then they will most likely buy an instrument later on. But to start, renting is most popular.
Right, your parents actually rent it for you,
Exactly.
right, for 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
Yes. How much would the rent cost?
It depends on the shop and it depends on the instrument, so it's different. I think it's a few $100s every few months. It's not too expensive. I think for a certain amount of months you pay a certain amount of money for those months. For beginners, I would say the shop is more important than the brand. That if a shop has a really good reputation, they generally have very, very good instruments and they have a good policy with the renting and a good location. That would be more important because then their selection of instruments will be at a certain level of quality with the instrument.
Okay. Thanks for the tip. I never thought of that the shop is quite important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did your parents rent from Samesh?
Yes, to start with, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that could be a starting point.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great starting point.
Thanks. Yuxuan, what's the more popular brand for violin and how much does it cost for beginners?
Usually I would recommend like few hundred because the sound is not too bad and it's not so expensive that people cannot afford it. So around 300 to 800 will be a good start.
Okay.
And for renting, I agree with Julian because the shop is more important.
Okay.
Definitely check out the Yelp. People who learn violin tend to like buy one instead of rent one.
Right.
And it could cost 20 to 40 per month
For
renting the violin. Yeah.
Okay.
It's also involved with the quality. Don't ever buy a violin or any instrument like $30.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Same for cello. Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's a great tip. Don't buy any of this instrument for $30. Let's talk about a little bit about carrying and the wear and maintenance. For cello, now I have a cello. What kind of care I need to put in? Probably goes out of tune. Does that actually wear out in certain pieces?
The cello itself, as long as you take care of it, like don't bang it into walls or drop it on the floor, it should be fine.
Okay.
The thing to remember is actually about, you play the cello with a bow, and you use rosin on the bow. Basically, you put it on the horsehair of the bow in order to get a good sound. It's actually the rosin that when it comes off on the string, if you don't clean off the rosin, it will eat away not only at the strings, but at the wood. So I would always suggest having at least 2 cleaning cloths with you. They're microfiber cloths, anything that can just pick up dust. And then basically after you play, as much as possible, you want to keep the instrument and the strings as clean as you can with those particular cloths.
Okay. Just the cloth, no water applied, right?
Yeah, not water because wood absorbs water, so that's going to be dangerous for the instrument. So usually just if you go into a string shop and you ask for a cloth to clean your strings, they'll immediately know what you're talking about.
Okay. What about tuning?
Similar between violin, violoncello is that we have usually 2 different types of ways to tune. There are the pegs at the top of the instrument, and then there are things called fine tuners, and they're little screws at the bottom of the instrument. For violin and viola, I've heard that it's much easier to use the pegs at the top, and you can have more general tuning that way.
Okay.
But if you kind of use the pegs and you're really close to the pitch, but you're not quite there, then you can use the fine tuners to be really specific.
Okay.
The thing with cello pegs is because they're bigger, it's harder to turn. You have to use your whole hand. For example, violin and viola, you can almost use just your fingers, right? Yeah. Just 2 fingers. But we have to use you got to get your arm into
your wrench
the muscle. It's like, a workout in order to tune your instrument sometimes. So you want to use the peg to get close to the pitch, and then you use the fine tuners more so then you don't have to keep using the peg over and over again.
Got it. And use a tuner to tell you the right pitch.
Yes, a tuner for sure. I mean, these days you can get pretty much any app on your phone.
Right.
A tuner app is fine.
It's accurate enough. Okay.
Right, or you can get again in the music stores there are a bunch of different tuners that you can use, so it's very accessible.
Okay. Any parts that in cello that could wear out that you need to replace over time?
Usually it doesn't wear out as long as again the rosin is cleaned off of the instrument, then it should be in decent condition to play. For the strings, usually you want to keep them in great condition. You want to change them every 6 to 9 months on the cello.
Oh, okay.
Because what happens is when you play on the strings, especially with the rosin, and then they get stretched out by being tuned, they do kind of wear out over time. So you would want to change them to keep the sound fresh and the instrument going when you're playing it.
For violin, there are parts that we need to pay attention to when it comes to maintenance.
Similar as the cello, we do use rosin and use horsetail bow and horsetail bow. So I recommend clean every day after practice and clean the wood, clean the surface and the string. About this tune, there's a brand called Krog, Krog, that goes pretty good with a good tuner to use on violin. I remember when I was a kid, my parents helped me to tune my violin every time before I practice, because violin pretty easy to go off tune, and it's normal. So my parents helped me tune it for me, because it's too hard for the kids. Even though it's small, the pack is small. We use pack and the fine tuner.
So let's talk about how we study. Any particular study materials that you would recommend?
Usually what I like to do is I like to go through the Suzuki books, Suzuki method books.
Okay.
Because they're very clear with how they lay things out, and it really covers so many of the basic ideas of how to play the instrument. And I think, violin and viola are very similar. So I introduce at the beginning, before the Suzuki book, I'll teach the basics about the names of the strings and how you set up the instrument and how you play the instrument. Then I usually just put the first Suzuki book in front of them and have them experiment a bit and see if they can do what's on the page, and if they have trouble, I would obviously help them understand what's happening. So that's usually how I start, is the Suzuki books.
Suzuki books, do they start from music theory, or do they start from ear training?
The people who benefit most, I would say, from at least the cello Suzuki books are going to be people who have already played a string instrument or who play piano, because it's printed music, and if you don't know how to read music, it can be more difficult, but they still make it in a way that's very clear, where they'll say something like exercises on a D string, and then the only note that's printed is a D. So you can kind of figure out, if this is the exercise on the D string and there's only one note, that has to be a D, So it'll definitely be easier if you know how to read music, but even if you don't, that's not a problem at all. I mean, I would obviously help with that, and it can definitely still be useful regardless of whether you can or cannot read music.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yuxuan, what kind of study material would you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend, for different age, I would recommend different material of the books. Because when I studied in the college, in the university, I picked the teaching technique. So we actually learned a dozen of violin learning materials for that. And Suzuki is definitely a good one with age from 6 to even grown up. So as Julian said, it's clear, and it has the setup for you, for example, from the basic things to the harder technique and stuff, and it's on its perfect way, on its perfect sequence. Because if you learn something earlier than it could affect your learning experience compared to other books. And if you choose another one for age 6 or even older, that could be too easy for them, and they got lazy from trying new things out. Yeah. And for younger age, for example, but it's rarely used, for age 3 to 5, I would recommend another book from Japan. It's better for younger kids because kids love to learn new things. Suzuki is a little bit too hard when they started.
I see.
I have to, because as Julian mentioned, there's no theory part when you start using Suzuki right away. So we as teachers have to teach every step before it. It's easy, but not for young kids, because they tend to forget like 10 minutes after you say it. So you have to repeating and using different book, because it's easy, it's short, it's easy to read. It's gonna benefit for them.
More fun.
More fun and more acceptable.
Cool. So for younger kids, you use this fun material from Japan, and for slightly older kids, you can use
Definitely Suzuki.
We will have fun Japanese material in the show notes, so make sure you check out the notes. Let's talk about the milestones when we learn the string instruments. How long does the beginner phase gonna take?
Usually, I would say, if I had to generalize, when you've played the instrument for a few years, then and you're committed and you practice consistently and you have good training from a teacher, then usually after a few years, like maybe 2-3 years, yeah, then
okay.
you kind of get into the routine of absorbing the basic technique of your instrument.
Do you agree to that statement?
Agree.
Okay. 2-3 years.
Definitely.
Okay. So let's talk about how much practice we need to put in. For beginners, would you recommend practice every day?
A little bit every day is good.
How long?
It depends on the person, but I found that maybe, even 15 to 30 minutes every day can help. And then if you want to take a day off, that's okay. You can take one day off. But generally, you want to get into the routine of continuous playing. Okay. So then you absorb quicker. So if you take too many breaks in between learning, especially something new, like for a lot of people who start, music is literally a different language. It's a different approach. It's completely new. And when you're learning something new, the more you can get into a routine of familiarizing yourself with it, then the more efficient it'll be to absorb what you're doing.
Yuxuan, what do you think? How much time the student should put in?
My standard usually goes from 30 minutes. Yeah.
At least 30 minutes.
At least 30 minutes per day, because learning instrument is especially like string instrument or any kinds of instrument that involve the moving, because we move differently. Any movement involved our body moving the same way like we play in a specific instrument. So once you get used to the moving, the posture is good, then you might take some day off. Yeah, so I would recommend 30 minutes at least, no matter what age. So when you're younger, you can start like 15 from like wake up in the morning, practice for 10 minutes.
In the morning as well?
In the morning.
Okay.
And after lunch, you can play for like 10 minutes. After dinner, you can play for 10 minutes. That also work.
For Julian, the class, does that also normally take about 45 minutes for cello?
Yeah, it's the same. It's basically the same idea.
Okay.
So 30 minutes and then 45 minutes, or that would be for the beginners. And the other benefit, as you mentioned, for 45 minutes is that you then have time. If there's a student who's having trouble focusing, you can then say, oh, you know what, how about we take a 5-minute break and then come back to it, and then you don't feel rushed and you feel like, oh, wait, we only have a few minutes to cover this area. If you have 45 minutes, you can do 10 minutes, then give them a 2-minute break, then go back to it. So it's paced in a way that's helpful both for the teacher and for the student.
That's great tip. So what can parents do? Do you recommend parents to stay in the classroom, and what their role should be like when they're home?
I think to start, it makes perfect sense for the parents to be in the class and observe, so then the parents and the kid are both comfortable. Just make sure that everyone's okay with everything being done in the lesson and the class. And again, it just depends on how the kid feels about the instrument. If they're really excited to practice, then they should ride on that motivation and let the kid do what they want to do. If there's a lack of motivation, like if they don't want to practice or they're having trouble practicing, then I'd recommend that the parents step in a few times just to kind of remind the kid to practice and things like that. But the other thing that can be helpful is, especially like the smaller kids, sometimes when you give them a bunch of concepts, they might have trouble understanding or they don't absorb everything. So what I usually do is I write it down in a notebook, and then I'll explain to the parents what I talked about and what it means. So if they're confused and they're practicing, then they don't have to wait an entire week to figure out what I meant. The parents can at least help with the basics of those particular things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the tip. The notebook.
Yes, notebook is very useful, and then you can actually you can always refer back to it. So if it's helpful for me as a teacher, because if I go over something I've said before, I can say, oh, you know what, on March 19th, I actually mentioned that before too. Right. And it's really useful. And then they can always review it as well. They always have a record of what we've gone over the past few months or however we've, been studying together.
Great tip, communication notebook. Put in the backpack and
right.
make sure we carry
exactly,
that.
Yes.
Yujuan, any tips for parents' role in this process?
I actually prefer the parents is around the kids while we take the lesson. Well, for most of the kids, would enjoy parents beside them because they're more comfortable. And parents, I don't need the parents to as focused as the kids who should be learning the instrument. I just need them to knowing some kind of basic stuff, like helping them with their posture, because when kids young, or when not just kids, from even some grown-up, when they play and complete new things, when they start studying some new things, there's some kind of small details they would forgot to pay attention with. For example, the posture on violin and cello, it could be very important.
Right, and it's very hard to master that, right?
Very, it's not hard to master that if you pay attention every time we practice.
Okay.
But it could be hard for kids because they tend to getting lazy, and when they're lazy, their posture getting a little bit different.
Right. They could get tired.
And that could be causing a little harder at some point when you try to level it up. Maybe because you have a bad posture or bad habit, you cannot play this certain technique. I would recommend parents stay with us, take recording or anything when I mention, pay attention to the wrist or pay attention to the posture, like that. When the parents is around, I would say, here, we need to take a recording.
Okay.
Focus on my wrist, and so when you go back home, you can check it out or take a photo. Okay. Check the difference, or hold their kids in front of them, showing how they should practice in a certain posture or something. Only during the beginning.
Okay, so when they're home, what would you want parents to do?
I know parents pretty busy, so 30 minutes practice, you don't have to always stand by. I would say just motivate them to practice.
Okay.
And sometimes when you got time, point out the bad habit or something, that could be really helpful. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And no yelling?
Right.
No yelling.
Ideally.
Julian touched base on this earlier a little bit about NYSMA exams. Besides NYSMA, any other standard exams available for kids to take? Exams
other than NYSMA, there's ABRSM. That one is pretty good as well. But
do most people take NYSMA?
Both are pretty common.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe in New York, people tend to take NYSMA because it's easier.
It's easier. Okay.
Easier. Yeah.
Okay.
No matter the piece they choose, and compared to the most harder part about the ABRSM is that they involve some theory.
Okay.
Yeah, they have theory tests for each grade.
So that's a written test.
Yeah, written test.
Okay.
And it's pretty good as well.
But NYSMA is just plain.
Just plain.
Yeah, just plain.
And the piece is getting easier, and you don't have to practice as much as you prepare for the ABRSM.
Got it.
Yeah.
Can you give us your best advice for parents or kids who are learning cello and violin? We'll start with Julian.
Sure. I would say that the first thing to know when you play any instrument is that it is a long process. So to kind of feel like you have to push the kid to be at a certain level by a certain age, to just kind of know the pace in which someone is learning an instrument, and to just be patient, as patient as you can with these things. They can be frustrating sometimes when you want your kid to practice and they're not practicing. Of course, we've all been through that, right? But again, it's a long process and it takes many years, and I think the thing that's most important is to also just make sure that the kid is enjoying what he or she is doing.
Okay.
That they would be more motivated to work at something they enjoy rather than something they dislike.
Have you been through this moment that you wanted to give up, and how do you overcome that?
It's not that you want to give up, it's just it's frustrating sometimes, because you want to get somewhere, but you know it takes a very long time to get there, and sometimes you want it to be sooner. And you just have to accept that it takes time to make that happen.
Okay, so you just have to talk to yourself, have to be patient to go overcome that.
Right, and I would say, to set small goals for yourself and say, okay, well, if I practice and I feel like I've improved in this particular way, like, for cello, I can say, okay, well, for beginners, if I've held my bow correctly for 10 minutes straight, then I've done something good today, just like small little goals to keep you motivated and not frustrated. You don't want to look up Mount Everest and climb it in one day.
Yeah.
You want to just make sure that you feel like you're improving, but also realistically knowing that it's a long process over time.
I think that's a great takeaway, that you set smaller goals that make you feel good,
right.
And then you're making progress instead of try to set a big goal that you're bound to fail.
Exactly, right.
Thank you. Yuxuan, what about your advice for parents and students?
I agree with Julian. Sticking into something is very hard for kids, especially for kids. But as you check online or Google it, nobody ever regret learning music or learning a specific instrument. Nobody ever comment like, I'm so regretted that I learned violin or something. So I've seen a lot of kids give up just because their parents pushing too much.
Interesting.
Yes, and some of them are pretty talented. So I actually it feels bad to see them try to play with music, any instrument with music, and their parents are actually the one that stopped them. So
because they push too hard.
They push too hard, and sometimes parents tend to yell, and they get them frustrated on this step. So every time when they try to practice, it's good at the beginning, but parents pointed out, this is not good, and you starting yelling. They got this frustrating feeling for I'd better not to practice. So this is the most important thing that I would suggest parents not to do. Don't push too hard, and insist in teaching kids how to focus is more important.
Is there any particular book, a piece of music, movie, or maybe a person that inspired you in your music journey? We'll start with Julian.
Yeah. Well, I know that this is not exactly a common thing, but I felt that my parents inspired me for sure, being in the music business. But I would say in terms of just more common accessibility, this is an older movie for sure, but the thing that really opened me up to loving music was Fantasia. It's an animation. The soundtrack for that movie is fantastic. It is amazing music, and it's a bunch of really incredible orchestral pieces and beautiful things, and I was so taken when I was younger by the music of that movie. So I mean it's now quite old. It's older, but even if it's not that particular movie, I would say if you're watching something and you love the music, then that can definitely be such an inspiration to want to create your own type of music when you're studying an instrument.
How old were you when you were inspired by that?
I think I was around 4 or 5, something around there.
Okay, that's right around the time you actually pick up cello.
Yeah, it all kind of went one after another. So.
Interesting. Yuxuan, anything that inspired you along your journey of music?
And actually, there's a Chinese movie it's about violin, but it's about learning violin, and it's pretty good, called 爸爸再爱我一次.
I remember that movie, the little boy who learned the violin. It was quite touching. What made you think that movie was so good?
It's more about relationship between why you choose to go professional, and how you deal with your parents.
Okay.
So how your parents gonna feel, and how does your frustrating process of learning instrument gonna feel like?
非常感谢朱令和宇璇老师的精彩分享，希望今天的节目对各位家长朋友们有所启发。希望和两位老师学习大提琴和小提琴的家长们可以直接和他们任教的有成音乐工作室联络， 微信上的朋友也欢迎扫码进入有成音乐咨询群，咨询相关的课程。有成音乐工作室位于大径，地址在北方大道11号2楼，邮编11021，咨询电话917-992-2272。谢谢大家收听和收看本期节目，我们下期节目再见。
希望您喜欢本期爱家网教育生活节目，欢迎您关注爱家网公众号北美爱家。爱家网官方网站在 happyhomekeeping.com。 我们的每期节目都会通过爱家网官网、爱家网微信群、Facebook、YouTube、iTunes Podcast， 还有喜马拉雅6个平台同时播出，欢迎您关注，并选择方便自己的平台收听。谢谢您的收听，我们下期节目再见。